Alright, so just went through a run with this build on Taliyah, but let's take a look at her, do a breakdown, and look at what other relic build options will work for her. So, starting off with her constellation, she has a slightly different constellation than most champions in that her 4-star is a bit different than your standard, but let's first take a look. Her 2-star, this is when an allied landmark is destroyed, you give your allies +1/+0. This isn't triggered that often since you aren't destroying landmarks super often. I think the Akshan version of this is certainly better, where it's when a landmark counts down, your allies get +1/+0. But yeah, this at least buffs your board somewhat as you're destroying your landmarks. And then from her 3-star, you get summon a hibernating rock bear, and allies just innately have +1/+1 in overwhelm. So this is quite good. Basically, you have Beast Within, but even better for your entire board based off her 3-star. So really, really strong there. Then her 4-star, each round, the first time you play a landmark, you refill mana equal to its cost. This is different than most champions who have like a power that's from the standard set of powers as their 4-star. But to my knowledge, this is not a power that's available in the standard set, so she has a bit different 4-star. Her 5-star, mana flow, just standard, get an extra mana gem. And then her 6-star, I do not have, but it is very good. And there's a lot of build options around this as well, but it's when allies attack, you play Threaded Volley. So this is a elemental skill that deals 2 damage to the blocker for, and then if it's dead or gone, it deals an additional 2 damage to the Nexus instead. Then your spells and skills all deal 1 extra damage for each allied landmark. So you sort of wanted to do a balance of having landmarks on the board and units, so that you're attacking in, you get multiple Threaded Volleys, but those Threaded Volleys will get beefed up if you're, sacrificing having units on the board and instead having landmarks on the board. So probably, having like 2 landmarks and 4 units, that's going to, provided you don't have Taliyah on the board, you're just attacking in with standard units. That's going to give you 4 Threaded Volleys that are each doing 4 damage. So you're doing 16 damage there based off skills. Whereas if you have, 3 and 3, it's going to be 3 Threaded Volleys, but they're dealing 5 damage each. So that's 15 damage. That's 1 less than if you had 4 and 2. So you can look at the, different options there. I don't know if 5 and 1 is that. That's going to be, you have 5 Threaded Volleys, so it's 10 damage. But then, 5 Threaded Volleys is also 15. So I guess the ideal is 2 and 4, and then it scales from there. You could also get additional damage effects from your relics, which could potentially throw off that ratio. You probably just want more units on the board if you're buffing your damage through relics, so keep that in mind. Her bonus stars, just her supporting champions get extra stats, which is nice. This is just based off their cost. Grumpy Rock Bear getting Phage. Grumpy Rock Bear is what pops out of this hibernating rock bear that you get for free from her 3-star. So having it be, essentially a 7/7 here, and then with her 3-star, that becomes an 8/8. Really nice. Also, when it pops out, it'll get that +1, so it'll be a 9/8. But, yeah, that's reasonable. Landmarks, you acquire an adventure of mana potion, so it'll just be a little bit cheaper to put out. And then Shaped Stone gets Elixir of Sorcery. So let's look at her relic options. And realistically, because her champion spell and the 6-star is a elemental spell, I should have been using the Icon of Valhir here. That would have been even better. There's no reason not to use this if you're just going off her 6-star or whatever. This is strictly better because her skill is an elemental skill, so that would have been a better way to go. rather than using big guns. But you could also use, a combination. You can use both Icon of Valkyr plus big guns if you wanted to. Just make that real focus on her spell power so that each of those threaded volleys are here now doing 5 damage. She has her attack does those threaded volleys, and she does it 3 times for her when you're doing this. So as long as she's leveled up, she will be spawning 3 of those for each of them, and they'll each do the standard, 2 damage. But then if you beef them up with this or with her 6-star power, they can do more. So you can end up with a full stack of all those threaded volleys coming in, and then the enemy can't really respond to them because you have a bunch of, you essentially have the whole board filled with, or the spell stack filled with casts of threaded volley. She has her play effect when you play her, that she will summon an exact copy of an allied landmark. That's one of the reasons I think Frozen Tomb is one of the best relics to put on her. This will make it so there is a landmark on the board that will summon a copy of her, and it has countdown 4. If, before it counts down, you are able to play her, and as long as you have the mana flow gems, so you'll start with 3 mana gems, then turn 2 you have 4, turn 3 you have 5. So you play her on turn 3, it'll be at countdown 1, it'll create a duplicate, then on turn 4, those will pop out, and you'll have 3 Taliyahs on the board. You can attack with the 3 Taliyahs, they will all do their, threaded volley, provided you've summoned enough landmarks up until then. And you'll have, essentially 9 instances of threaded volley going with Taliyah just by herself. So that is very strong. You can watch the video I did before this and see how that works, because that build was very focused on just getting multiple Taliyahs on the board and attacking in with them. So that is very good. If you want to just focus more on your board power, you can certainly just use other relics that, give... Oh, well, she already has Overwhelm, so you won't want to do much with that. But you can do things that will, like I said, if you're have her 6-star, certainly the powers from the elemental skills. But if you don't have that, you just want to focus on like combat damage and whatnot, you can use other sorts of relics. There isn't a whole lot on here, but you could use things like the Deluxe Relic. This will pull a 2 cost or less follower from your deck, which if you look at your starting deck, the 2 cost follower here is the Clockwork Curator, which is quite good. You also have a Rock Hopper. Ideally, you'll hit the Clockwork Curator with the Lux Relic. This way, because you have a Hibernating Rock Bear on your board in the beginning, you can right away pop that with him. It'll count. It has countdown 3 by default, but because it's already on your board at the start of the turn, it counts down by 1, so it'll be at countdown 2 on turn 1. So if you're able to use that Clockwork Curator turn 1, you'll pop out, a 9/8 Overwhelm on turn 1, very strong. So highly recommend using that if you want to focus more on your board and tempo. Then Lux's Relic will be very good for that, helping make sure you draw, or giving you a higher chance to draw that Curator. You can also just mulligan for it, but yeah, this is a better chance to draw it. Plus, even if you get the other guy, he summons a landmark that'll get you closer to your Taliyah level up. So it's not bad to use it anyway. You can use things to get her out earlier if you have the Swain Relic plus this. So Swain Relic, Pack Powder, and Scourge's Stash. This will let you, have essentially a 1-cost version of her, toss her out on turn 1. You can duplicate either the that hibernating rock bear relic that's already out there, or if you've played another relic or another landmark, sorry, we have that. If you have her 4-star, where essentially you can play a landmark, the first landmark you play each turn are for free. You can play a different landmark on turn 1 and then duplicate that with her. So that's also a possibility there. You can just go for general board power by using stuff like Black Shield. So all your units will have Overwhelm and Spell Shield. That's perfectly fine. Additional deck power. You can get the stacked deck. Stacked deck. This will give your units more +1/+1 based off how many cards you have in your deck. So just make sure you're drafting a lot of cards. When you go to shops, add a bunch of cards to your deck. This will give your whole deck a bunch more power. Then you can be attacking in with big overwhelms. That'll be decent for you. Let's continue here. Portal Pals, all right on her. She's a mid-cost champion, so you'll get some benefit out of this. It's not as strong as the high-cost champions when they're using it, but it's decent. You could use Shock and Awe. However, there aren't a lot of 1 or less cost units in her deck. This guy that pops out of the Ancient Preparations is a 1 cost. But beyond that, all of these, the Clockwork is 2 cost. This guy counts as 5 cost. This is 2 cost. So you'd have to draft pretty heavily into it if you wanted to get leverage out of Shock and Awe. But again, if you're, using like big guns, Icon of All here, that the icon won't trigger with Shock and Awe, but big guns will trigger with Shock and Awe, so that will increase the power of this. If you don't have the epic relics, of course, big guns and Shock and Awe, you can instead use Ludens or multiple Ludens. So this is always an option to increase your spell and skill damage. You can use multiple of these, and that is a reasonable substitute for her. Let's continue here. Her spells in her deck, I wouldn't say there's too much to focus around there. One of them is quite good. This one advances your landmarks, is very nice. The other one just summons 2 of these rolling sands and then draws you a card. Not particularly good. This one, if you get it in your starting hand, highly recommend keeping it so that you can accelerate your landmarks. But beyond that, her relics are, her spells are not that great. Her champion spell is also this Taliyah's Stone Weaving. It just lets you manifest a landmark that you can afford. I wouldn't say it's particularly good. Typically, once you have Taliyah on the board, you're not really looking to summon more landmarks unless you haven't leveled her up yet. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that is particularly strong. I think in general she's not the strongest of champions, but she can do okay. Just not the best. You certainly, as long as you have her 3-star, you don't need any any of these overwhelm relics like Beast Within or Spirit of the Bruhu or anything like that. She basically already has +1/+1 in overwhelm to all her units, so none of that is necessary. You can use things like Scout with her, but shuffling her back into your deck, she's a mid, expensive champ. Wouldn't say that's particularly great. Spending a lot of mana to get her out is not particularly worthwhile. The Challenger can be very good, getting your whole board Challenger, especially if you have pretty large units. This is worthwhile if you're going to be more board combat focused, using like stacked deck and things like that to just beef up your board. I would say that is a stronger way to go about it. Again, her champion spell, not something to really focus on, so I wouldn't bother too much with that. Yeah, not a whole lot to do on her champion side. If you don't have a lot of blue relics, I would say that Challenger is the strongest green relic on her, especially when she's leveled up. You can make sure those threaded volleys are hitting the characters you want it to hit. That will probably be your strongest bet there. Banshee's Veil, keep her safe that way, also quite good. And then, getting multiple copies of her in your deck is also reasonable. But yeah, overall, I think the best builds for her focused on spell power and making sure her threaded volleys are doing well, and then getting multiple copies of her is pretty ideal. So that's what I personally would focus on. That's generally about it. I guess the one other thing to note, Riptide Battery does count as a spell or skill, and this will effectively, if you manage to damage their Nexus before you play her, you can have this trigger multiple times. So, send out 5 cannon barrages. If you have a bunch of landmarks on the board, those cannon barrages, and you have her 6-star, those cannon barrages will do a whole bunch of extra damage based off how many landmarks you have on the board. So that is something else you can leverage. That's about it. If you have any questions about her or other champions you want to see, let me know. And otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.